Do you think that two-state solution for Israel and Palestine has become fantasy?
What happened on October 7th and in response to highlighted a very important point. There's anger and there's violence, and they won't end. So for both sides, not necessarily for the person who started October 7th or the person who instructed the violent response to the civilians and so on, but for the sake of Palestinians and Israelis together, you need to have a two-state solution. It's much more difficult now to get there, but in essence, if we don't do that, you'll have more violence. Every number of years, there will be more violence. So that's why we need friends of both sides.
But were you surprised to see the very soft or sometimes even indifferent position of some Western countries when they saw the massacre in Gaza here?
I wasn't surprised. There's no question at all, but I was extremely disappointed first. Having been in diplomacy for a long time before that, I knew that the talk wasn't exactly like the walk. There's a big difference between the two. But to go to the extent where you're a complicit partner in this by providing military support and then not responding when excessive happens.
This is Eyes on Middle Powers, a podcast where we dive deep into the foreign policy updates of the middle powers, offering their perspectives on key issues shaping the regional and global affairs. This podcast is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia's Middle Power Studies Network. Hello, this is Dino Patijalal. Welcome to the podcast of Middle Power Studies Network. And today we have very special guest, Mr. Nabil Fahmy, who is the former foreign minister of Egypt, and he was also, we had the same job, ambassador to the United States and Japan, and now he's a dean emeritus of the American University in Cairo. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And so, when did you join diplomacy?
Formally, I joined diplomacy in 1976. It's a process where you go through exams and all of that. But that's when I formally joined. I had been in the army for 2 years. And I left diplomacy 2011. And then came back again in 2013 to become foreign minister. So it's been a lifetime.
Why not entrepreneur or any other fields? Yeah.
You'll be surprised and amused. When I graduated, my degree was in physics, and I had no intention being there. I committed to go into the private sector, and the market was opening up at the time.
Or the money was better also.
Well, I definitely got it. But then a colleague of mine challenged me that I couldn't pass the Foreign Service exam. And when you're young, you get provoked by these things. So I literally sat down for 6 months in my room, study law and different things. Sat for the exam. Thank God I succeeded in the exam. But then my father then came into me and said, okay, now you should go and look at the private sector because that's what you wanted to do. I joined emotionally, not for nothing more, but I never regretted it, which I'm happy to say. At the same time, I did it my way. Always respecting laws and regulations and policy. But contrary to the practice, I lived most of my career in Cairo and only every now and then did a foreign post because growing up, I had been living abroad. So I enjoyed living in Cairo. And I wanted my family, especially the children, to use Arabic as their first language, not English or French or whatever foreign language. So it's a long process. It's a commitment, a conviction. You don't become a diplomat if you're comparing it to other jobs. It's something you have to be committed to. Because there's so much displacement and so much responsibility in the tyrants.
You were foreign minister of one of the most consequential countries in the Middle East. What is the best asset of for Egypt's foreign policy in your view?
First of all, traditionally, because we live on two seas, we are in two continents. We've always been engaging with the world. There's never been a point in history with other different systems when Egypt was in isolation from the world. Secondly, because we're centrists, close to the topic that you bring in to discussion, middle of the road, middle states. We've always tried to communicate to find a common ground. And that being said, if you're a middle state and you want to play a role, you have to take initiative. So we were instrumental over the years in going to war or to go into peace, trying to solve issues in all of our relationships, be it in Africa, Middle East, and so on. But also, and I say this proudly, the topic that you're discussing today under your leadership, we're discussing under your leadership, the very beginning of the UN, when it was being drafted, the law or the constitution being drafted, our elite openly said, guys, the world will change over time. So we need to review the Charter and the Security Council in particular every 25 years. It's this engagement that has established a credibility for Egypt in diplomacy, even with countries that don't agree with us. Therefore, it's a very easy calling card, or it's a credible calling card, not easy, but it's a credible calling card for any Egyptian diplomat. And you also bear responsibility to remain at that standard and at that level. So it's been engaged.
So consistency is at the heart of Egypt's credibility in international affairs. Which
I argue credibility. In other words, consistency is also correct. But even when we shift our policy, it's not a knee-jerk reaction to an event. It's gradual, and it's based on rational thinking. So there has been no sudden changes in foreign policy. Maybe occasionally changes in domestic policy, but not in foreign policy. If you work with us, you know what to expect in the short and medium term, at the very least. And again, the other important point is we are influential in our region. A quarter of the Middle East lives in my country. And that ultimately affects not only our policy, but it also affects trends in the whole region. So my long answer to your excellent, important question is diplomacy and foreign policy requires credibility. Otherwise, you won't be taken seriously.
But what do you say, Wajri? Egypt always has strong and good relations with the Western countries. Is the West in decline?
The West is in decline. I'd have to say yes. Frankly, there's no way to shy around that. The West succeeded more than any other region in the world for generations. But rather than to continue to develop for collective interest, they, as you yourself are aware, focused to a great degree on being the primary body, primary grouping. And this is especially true for the leader of the West, the U.S. The issue of primacy became so important that they started to lose their strongest asset, which is the soft power, much more than the hard power. The soft power, the fact that many of our generations wanted to achieve the same as what was achieved in the West. Well, a strong asset, but then you have to be able to resonate with an Egyptian, with an Indonesian, with a French person, You can't try to simply do it your way along the place. So today, frankly, because the West had emphasized lofty principles and practices, but not implemented them when it came to their implementation or their allies, only when it came to others, you start losing your credibility. You lose the soft power. And it's regrettable because, frankly, they had an opportunity to really move the world after the Cold War period. They had won the Cold War competition. And had they engaged collectively with the world, they would have been much better off, and we would have all been much better off. But again, we can still work together, and we need to work together. We don't have the choice. They don't have the choice to work in isolation. I think isolation isn't. With the emergence of technology, just even maritime technology became less and less of a realistic factor. And now with communications, it's almost impossible to.
Does Egypt see what's going on in the world affairs now as just a disruption, or is this the beginning of a long-term permanent transition into something else?
I honestly believe it's a reflection, inflection point. The world will not go back to bipolar world, definitely not the same to poles, but it won't even be bipolar. And furthermore, even the richer, the more powerful copies will be dependent on a lot of us to pursue their interests. If you look at the globalization market-wise, it means making it the most efficient system all over the world, which requires engagement with others. Secondly, when you lose the trust of people, they won't invest. So I would argue that in the past, when the West came and said, you need to do this, it was taken first positively. It was difficult until you felt this is not being implemented. So I actually believe the West has lost an opportunity. It doesn't mean that the West will be influential. They will be. And I would always argue against ignoring the West or the East because they are part of the same global community. They're all partners.
Yes. Let's talk about the region. I noticed that one of the striking feature of regional architecture in the Middle East is there is no one overarching architecture. Yeah. Can you go deeper? Why is that? And is there a way to fix that, please?
Sure. In the past, the Middle East was looked at as the Arab world plus Iran and Israel, although there were no relations between Israel and many of the Arab countries. That was the tradition. It was the Arab world and others. The Arab world and the others were always dependent on foreign parties, East and West, US and the West and Soviet Union at the East. The Cold War broke down. Technology shifted the energy balance. Reduced dependence of the West on Middle East energy. It's still important, but it's less dependent on it. Consequently, the relationships and the imbalances in the region shifted. The Arab Middle East and Iran used to be dependent on the West. With the Iran Revolution, that shifted. With the shifted technology and the end of the bipolar world, the West wasn't that strongly invested in security in the Arab world. So you had a decreasing security factor or increasing insecurity in the Arab world. At the same time, you had a growing security capacity in Iran, a growing security capacity in Israel by any standard, and even a growing security capacity in Turkey, which was on the fringe of the Middle East and in the past, and now is considered to be part and parcel of Europe. Yeah, but Europe and the Middle East at the same time, depending on the agenda item has been discussed. So I would really argue that there's a imbalance. I don't want to say power, but of influence in the case. Let me add also, be very candid. I think the Middle East suffered from its own hasses. It's an old region, a lot of history, a lot of culture, and things like that. But it saw a huge youth buzz. My country alone, which as a quarter of the Middle East population lives in my own country, 65% of population is younger than 30 years of age. So this is a population that wants change. It wants the future. It wants to look forward. Most of the countries in the Middle East, including my own at certain points in time, were fixated on keeping things as they were, rather than on building for the future, opening assets for the future. So you saw this disruption between the logical aspirations of the people and the attitude of governing bodies. It's shifted over the last 10 years, but that shift causes a point of transition. So I can tell you that today, whether back home in my own country or in many of the Arab countries in particular, the talk is all about the future. While in the past, it was all about consistency. The three non-Arab countries didn't make that mistake. They were all about change, whether we liked the change or disliked the change. And regrettably, two of the three, Iran and Israel, fell into the mistake of we're more powerful, therefore we will change things to our benefit, rather than to the mutual benefit of everybody in the region. And that caused an even further part. So you had this increasing stature and confidence in the non-Arab countries of the region, and a decreasing confidence and stature in some of the Arab countries. Now we're shifting back, and that's why you see the tensions and the push and the pull.
See. The Saudi Iran rapprochement that was brokered by China, and apparently there's a Fatah Hamas rapprochement. Also, China has a role. Abrahamic Accord, I think Jared Kushner played a role. What is the capacity of local countries in the Middle East without outside help, extending themselves to fix their own problems?
The Chinese rapprochement of Saudi and Iran was very important, but actually it started in the region, started by the Iraqis and by the Omanis. The third and last phase was brought to conclusion in China. So had there not been the Middle Eastern work, you wouldn't have reached the Chinese as a component. But the Chinese component was important because we were pushing and pulling, and it had to be brought to the fore. Secondly, if you also look at the region as a whole, why was it China that became the sponsor rather than United States or in the past Soviet Union? Because two countries were becoming less engaged and one country was becoming more engaged in the region. Now, another issue which resonates with your point, as a Middle Easterner, I want to give you many cases of where we solved our problems rather than having to go to a forum, a party. And to be very candid, yes, most region issues were caused by Middle Easterners, and ultimately the trend to solving them was a Middle Eastern. But also most of the mistakes were caused by Middle East. But anyway, my point here is very precise. Despite Cold War competition in the past between the Soviets and the Americans in the 60s and 70s, the last century, we went to war. And neither our Soviet friends or the Americans wanted the order. What in the world are you guys doing? We want to liberate our territory, nothing more. You want peace. And when we finished the war, the whole objective was, let's change the paradigm so we can negotiate the solution. We went and did that. And again, both of our Soviet and American friends said, you're going too quickly here. Hold on a bit. So we were able to change the paradigm ourselves. They ultimately joined and supported the process, at least mostly did the West. And I argue this, that regional players have the key. They need to put it in the door. And then legitimately ask for support internationally to help bring this to fruition and move forward. But I don't think you can impose a solution from abroad. We need to take the position, but because none of us are isolated, I would argue that it's unacceptable, it's incompatible with norms that an international player support a party in the region that is in occupation of territory or applying standards that are a complete violation of international human rights. So I would argue that if we're looking at the Arab-Israeli peace process or the lack of a peace process, yes, international players have a responsibility. They have to hold players to the standard that whether it's in your conflict or towards resolution, there are principles and norms that you have to apply. They can't negotiate on your behalf, but so you're going to be supporters, then you have influence because we all live in one community. So I would argue the world has to help in resolving these things because they will have ramifications not only on us, but also on the world as a whole.
As former foreign minister, I know you had this dilemma. You have interests and values and principles, and they don't always go together, right? And you were at the helm of the Egyptian foreign policy. How do you navigate? How do you make the right or the best decisions when they two don't necessarily go together?
Absolutely great question. Thank you for raising it. And I'll answer you directly, but let me enter from a particular end. When I was foreign minister, I joked first, turned out to be actually completely true, that my nightmares were better than my days. Because I wake up in the morning, on my west, Libya was completely broken down in civil war. South, we have problems with Ethiopia and a little bit of starting instability with Sudan. Eastwards, no peace process between Palestinians and the Israelis. Further east, the civil war in Syria. An unstable Iraq, all the way down to the Yemen situation and tensions between Iran and the Gulf. So there were imminent problems all the time. Couldn't say I'm not going to deal with this issue today. They were all on top of it. And we were going through a transformation back home as well. But I would make the point that as foreign minister, I'm responsible for policy. Policy means dealing with crisis, resolve or handling conflict, and planning for the future. It's not. I have no way to say my mandate finishes today. The fourth day, I was foreign minister, had the press conference, and I laid out, this is what I'm going to do the whole year. First thing, I'm going to defend the revolution. Secondly, two issues on my mind are Palestinian issue and the water issue with Ethiopia and Sudan. And thirdly, I'm going to ensure that Egypt always has more than one option on any issue. Without hesitation, any issue, I have to have more than one option. It's not against anybody, it's pro-Egypt. To do that, you have to build for the future as you take decisions. And at the counter meetings, one point we were having problems, particularly with Turkey at the time, and some of the ministers Oh, they did this, you need to do this. They did this, you need to cut relations. They did this, and so on. I would sit there. Their distinguished colleagues like to listen to there's a collective responsibility, a cappy. And when they'd finish, I said, look, this is international invasions. I would take action, but I look at today, tomorrow, and the day after. We will have a tough discussion with Turkey in this particular case, but we're not going to do anything that is detrimental to strategic Turkish-Egyptian relations or detrimental to the Turkish people, per se. The only way you can do that, frankly, especially if you're in a volatile period, you have to explain what you do to your own people and then explain to foreigners, this is what I'm going to do. This is why I'm going to do it. Don't let them explain to you what you should be doing. You explain that the confidence. I mean, I would frankly very clearly explain we're going through the remnants of a non-traditional change of government. And it's going to take time. We had 2 revolutions in 2.5 years. It's going to take time to stabilize. So this is what I'm going to do domestically. This is what I'm going to do regionally. And this is what I'm going to do this page. If you don't do that, then you have to be reactive. And it's a big mistake for a developing country, medium-sized country with important relations to be reactive to other positions all the time.
The 2 events that rocked the Middle East, obviously the October 7th attack by Hamas towards Israel and the subsequent Israeli military operations attacking on Gaza, which is unthinkable human casualties. Do you think that 2-state solution for Israel and Palestine has become a fantasy?
Before October 7th, very few people were talking about 2-state solution. And it was not a pressing issue. What happened on October 7th and the response to highlighted very important point. There's anger and there's violence. And they won't end if we don't deal with the issue. The former head of Shin Bet, Knesset, the Israeli domestic forces, Mr. Ayal, went on public interview. And he of course had retired. And he was asked, what's the solution, please? And he said, we can't live together. We need to separate and live side by side. The interviewer said, you mean you want to go for it? Or the war terrorists? He said, no, I want to secure Israel. There will be more violence as the occupation continues. So, for both sides, not necessarily for the person who started October 7th or the person who instructed the violent response to the civilians and so on, but for the sake of Palestinians and Israelis together, you need to have a 2-state. So, my long answer to your question, it had been forgotten before October 7th. It's much more difficult now to get there. But in essence, if we don't do that, you'll have more violence. Every number of years, there will be more violence. So that's why we need friends of both sides need to engage in tough love with their friends and allies, that you will get what you have, your legitimate interests, not beyond that. But we need to work together on solving it.
Were you surprised? In Indonesia, we used to see very righteous Western pressures on us when it comes to questions on human rights, and as a former diplomat, I experienced that for many decades. But were you surprised to see the very soft or sometimes even indifferent position of some Western countries when they saw the massacre in Gaza here?
I wasn't surprised. There's no question at all, but I was extremely disappointed first. having been in diplomacy for a long time before that, I knew that the talk wasn't exactly like the walk. There's a big difference between the two. But to go to the extent where you're a complicit partner in this, by providing military support and then not responding when excessive had. So it was very difficult to swallow. But let me also add a point. I'm a centrist by nature, and I'm internationalist. I believe in engaging others. I can tell you today, when I speak back home or anywhere else in the Middle East for that matter, and talk about engaging the West, I'm almost bored. People no longer want to hear about the West doing something right. The West has done a lot of wrong things, but they've done a number of right things as well. But the sentiment now is so angry. If the minute you talk about the West, the minute you talk about, I don't know if you want, peace, even the minute you talk about human rights, which is the benefit of everybody, as long as it's actually practiced by everybody, with everybody, and not so only on a piecemeal basis. All of these points have lost credibility. The average person in the street no longer holds the West to my standard as it did in the past.
You just came back from Oslo. You had a seminar or workshop there. What should we expect from Syria moving on?
For my own country, is a very important historic partner in moving things forward in the region. I think it's a very important player in ensuring that the whole package of Arab-Israeli peace can be achieved. You can't achieve it without involving also the Syrians. That being said, the new Syrian government comes with a lot of baggage, comes from certain groupings. So we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place. We cannot and should not disengage from Syria. It's an important country, so we need to engage, including with this new government. At the same time, we want to be more confident that we're moving together in the right direction, even if we differ on certain details. So it's important. We need to engage them, need to be credible. But they still have to find themselves. They have to define what kind of Syria they want to be. And I would argue, if it's not an inclusive Syria for the Syrians, not irrespective of whether any other country likes the package, if it's not inclusive, they will suffer from that. If it's not a Syria that has identity, you could reach tactical arrangements with anybody. But at the end of the day, if you don't have identity, you get ill from within rather than from abroad. So, and my third point is Syria isn't yet stable. Politically, who exactly constitutes the new leadership and what's the influence around all of Syria is in a process phase. There will always be a point where different political trends, different politicians argue, well, okay, you want us to remain in your coalition, then we need these points, or we need points to the right rather than the left. Well, the situation in Syria is it's polarized with a lot of different people. So we will follow with deep interest. We will follow with a constructive, although critical eye. At the same time, being 7,000 years old, as Egyptians like to say, it would be naive to assume it's going to be an easy task. But we wish them luck.
Is there a possibility of Syria becoming a failed state?
The two things would argue against that, although the possibility does exist. One thing is when you talk to the average Syrian, they all want to have a better Syria. So this evolving desire among Syrians to engage in building a better Syria is a strong positive. The other point is, I think a lot of countries, not only from the region, even the West, want this process to succeed. So much more than those who want not to succeed. So I think the environment is there for success, but the Syrians, at the end of the day, have to step up and peak out.
Fahmy, you were once in Washington, D.C. as ambassador, and so was I. One thing that struck me was how in American political circles, Iran is very demonized. I mean, you can't find anyone in Washington, D.C. Who doesn't talk negatively, excessively about Iran. And I think the feeling is mutual on Iran's side. And do you think this strategic fault line between the United States and Iran can ever be overcome?
Yes, I do.
And how we?
Sure. Yes, I do. It was demonized starting with the Islamic regime. Before that, of course, was the Shah. It was a Guruish. Islamic regime started off with the infamous embassy episode. So that also has left a strong negative
American hostages.
embassy. Thirdly, of course, the Israelis are pumping fuel into this.
Absolutely.
But Iran is the devil incarnated in the region. Therefore, you need to stand with us against Iran. Iran isn't going anywhere. So it's important to engage Iran, to see diplomatically, to see where you can move forward and how far, and also to be candid with them. These things are required, but also to listen to them. It's not only a process of one side talking together. Now, having said that, it's complicated. I mean, you came with an excellent introduction. Both sides have demonized the other side. And I think, frankly, that the West or the US versus Iran debate became a domestic issue on both sides. You want to criticize the American administration from within, you raise the Iran pulse. You want to criticize the Iranian position from within, you raise the American policy. That was also dangerous. I think this issue is still going to be sensitive. Even when they reached a nuclear deal, ultimately broke down and Trump won, withdrew from it. But I'm frankly pleased that President Trump in his second term has decided to talk to the Iranians and see whether it can be moved forward. And the Iranians, despite they were shocked when President Trump in his first term withdrew from the nuclear deal. But they engaged Americans. Granted, there's a different geopolitical balance in the region, and engaging America serves their interests. But for me, having an argument is justification for increased diplomacy, not the opposite. So if there's no crisis, we don't need diplomacy except the normal day-to-day things. If there's a crisis there, the best way to deal with a crisis is to talk to each other, agree and disagree once, 2, 10 times over. So I'm positively inclined that this administration in America is talking to Iranians and vice versa. A point to be said, however, and it's something that came up in our discussions as a group during this visit. The hosting country for these things was Ontario. So regional states actually played a role in bringing these parties together. And I see an increasing role by regional states on many of these issues, not yet to resolve the issues, but I see a realization that in my region at least, and I would argue global, we are globalizing markets, but we're regionalizing conflicts. And therefore the region players have to be more prominent in the pursuit of their goals.
China now is becoming is having more presence in the Middle East through trade and also other means. I would love to hear your thoughts about what do you think as the region's middle power and regional power of China's increasing engagement in the Middle East, and are you facing some other pressures from the U.S. on this thing? So how are you dealing with that?
Sure. First of all, Egyptians, we like to say we're the mother of the world. We're in the middle of the world, that's fellow man, but we will engage anybody that respects our interests. We will engage. The idea that we shouldn't engage doesn't work for us. You can't live on two seas and two continents and nothing works. Secondly, China is not an emerging force. It is a significant force and player, force in economic positive sense. So yes, we engage with China more and more, and they filled the vacuum that was left with the end of the Cold War and the desire by some, and the reality that the two former pillars wanted to play a less role. The Soviets, because of what happened to the Soviet Union, so Russia was not that actively engaged. And the Americans felt, as President Obama said, we want to pivot towards Asia. So, well, there's a vacuum there that the Chinese immediately jumped. Now, for us, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're 7,000 years old. So you can criticize us for anything, except one thing. We're not naive. Any criticism we can happy to take there, but nobody says we're naive. When you've been around for so long, you're not naive. So yes, we received the Chinese. We know they have vested interest in pursuing their goals, and fight's fine with us. If they didn't have interest, they wouldn't be there. And when we engage them with a wise, rational attitude. It's a mutual benefit opportunity, and we've had tremendous agreements and occasional disagreements. But for example, one of the typical criticisms from the West has been, you're going to fall into the Chinese debt trap. Well, you're assuming that I'm ignorant, first of all. Secondly, well, what about the Western debt trap? Same thing. Now, does that mean that we assume China is doing this all out of good faith and the kindness of her heart without injectors? Of course not. So it's for us to balance out, not only about China, as you've heard me say on meetings, I've been publicly as minister, as ambassador before that, and as a public servant after that. I always argue dependency on everybody is unhealthy, even on friends. Not because they're going to be against you, but they may have different priorities, important time. So when we engage China as a partner, not as a dependent. Our relationship with the West are strong, have been long-standing, but more and more they're about being a partner, not on dependence. And we are aware that there will be some conflicts here. Now, the first issue, of course, was technology. Don't let them in the technology area. Okay. Are you offering the alternative? Give us soft terms, not technology, and we're happy to take yours rather than Chinese. Chinese offer better technology or the same at lower prices. For our own interest, we need to go. We're not going to play, and we have stopped playing, trying to run between two elephants against each other. We got beyond that.
And there is this perception that Chinese, when they engage with you, they don't really interfere also with they don't politically interfere. In contrast with, there's a lot of American interference.
Definitely, their approach is different. They're looking for, if you want, rising generation that serves their interests. And culturally, it's a different approach from what you've heard from the West. But that being said, ultimately, even with China, which has not done anything that has been negative towards us, ultimately, if they make more and more investments in if the market Egypt becomes more and more interesting for them, down the road, they will want to ensure that they can defend their interests. So, yeah, we understand what we're doing. We don't assume that they have no objectives, but we have objectives also. So we'll work with them. And the only thing that bothers us is we're not going to shift from the West to China or from China to the West or to Russia. We will pursue a certain Egypt interest. And those who've had relations with us for years should by now understand we are in this to build Egypt and to help build Bangladesh. But it's not really about us. I'm embarrassed to say this. The reality is the recent shift on the tariff issue has caused a much stronger shift from Western products to Chinese products than anything else. I'll give you one example. I won't name the country because it's not appropriate to name it, although there's nothing wrong with that. China imports a lot of soya from abroad. And because of the tariffs, suddenly, very important, prestigious, dignified country, its market became that China are the largest importer, and therefore a third of their trade abroad was with China. This wasn't caused by anybody else. It was caused by the tariffs. And one cannot criticize them for doing that because the market became so positive towards China. So rather than trying to tell people, don't do this or don't do that, let's work with each other to build incentives so that you don't feel in any way, if you give me a win-win situation with you, it will definitely have an effect on whether I go towards China, towards Russia, towards Japan, or to any other country. But if it's don't go there, although it's a better offer, it won't resonate very much.
Of course. Final question. God comes to you and says, Nabil Fahmy, you've done very well, you're a good person. I'm going to reward you. I'm going to grant your wish of what should the world be and give me those three wishes of what you want the world to be better in.
I want decision making to be just. Whatever the issue is, let's be fair with each other, so that we all feel. Secondly, and I'm going to focus on the world per se. It cannot be disorderly. We need to have a system that provides order, and order can only come with rule of law. Power politics are tactical, but strategic relations are based on law. One takes is like having a malady, and if you decide not to take medicine for it, you're going to end up paying a much heavier price. So that's the second thing is we need to ensure that the force of law overrides the rule of power or the force of power. If you don't do that, you will have much more disorder throughout. And thirdly, you need to have a more humane road, whether it is in how we manage our disagreements or in terms of looking at homeless in the street or people under occupation living without any access to basic human rights, is something, frankly, that it's, as somebody who has been in government service for so long, it pains me to see that internationalists like you and myself are leaving the world in a state where it's really difficult to accept so many years after World War II, when we tried to build, I wasn't born then, but when the world tried to build a better world. So let's just be just, apply the law, and be humane.
Well, your answer is better than mine because my first answer would be for Indonesia to win the World Cup in football.
We have Hamas Salah, he does that.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Nabil Fahmy, and we wish you all the best. And I hope that you can come see Indonesia again. We were in Bandung together for the 7 years anniversary of the Bandung Spirit. And thank you for
Thank you, Ambassador, for inviting me, and I'm honored, and I've gained a lot of insights in DBDs. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's all our conversation with the former Foreign Minister of Egypt, Nabil Fahmy, and look forward to our next discussions. Thank you for watching. I'm Dino Patigalaw for the Middle Power Studies Network podcast. Thank you.